do a review of Stnr by John Williams, a 1965 novel. You'd think, oh, written in the 60s and called Stnr, it's that kind of novel. No, this is a campus novel that starts in 1910 and ends sort of after World War II, and the titular character is William Stnr and is anything but somebody who partakes in that sort of recreational drug. His recreational drug, and the reason, probably one of the primary reasons you should read this book, his recreational drug is literature, is reading. He is a passionate, austere, silent, meditative portrait of a reader, and that's why you should be interested in this book. That's why you should read this book. Not only that, because of the prose, because of how John Williams, born in 1922, died in 1994. His prose is very austere and clear and precise, and the narrative of this guy's life, because we follow William Stnr from him entering the University of Missouri in 1910 through 2 world wars, through the stymieing of his his academic career, through a disastrous marriage, through an affair which gets thwarted through his feud with the guy who's stymieing his academic career, to his death, where he dies fairly unregarded, probably going to be quickly forgotten by his colleagues and by his students. There is such a narrative drive of each one of these stages of the cross, as it was. Not a religious novel, but it's like we kind of hit each landmark, bang, 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 each chapter, and it kind of drives you through this narrative of this guy's life. Now you're probably thinking, like, wow, this sounds like a complete bummer. But it's not. It is not a bummer. It is a guy who does fail, is thwarted in kind of most of the stages of his life. His professional life doesn't go anywhere because he feuds with a guy who's like basically a hunchback with matinee idol looks, who wants to kind of promote somebody who does not have the chops. And Stnr has his ideals about this university as his friend Dave Masters, who gets killed very quickly in World War I, that this is a refuge. It's a refuge from the world. It's a place where incompetence and those who just aren't kind of capable of existing in the real world can come, and that what this Hollis Lomax wants to bring in is the world, that he's bringing in outside influences that Stnr fervently believes aren't true, and he's willing to kind of die on his sword for it. And indeed, his academic career does die on the sword. But the big thing with this is that this novel, the central concern and the central thing of why it just so completely captured me, is that Stnr starts out he's a farm boy with parents who are getting subsistent farmers getting ground down, and he gets sent to the University of Missouri not to study literature but to study agriculture. But there, in a first-year English class, he catches it. He catches the beauty, the wonder of literature, and it changes him, and it changes the entire scope of his life. And his mentor is a man who, it's Archer Sloan, who is a guy who is getting on in years and has that frustration of trying to bridge that gap between the stuff that he's found on these pages and trying to communicate that to his students. And Archer Sloan is sort of an example, maybe a cautionary example to Stnr, of the guy who couldn't bridge that gap and the bitterness that bred. But that he takes up that mantle, and and that's what kind of animates his life to a large degree. He has an affair later on in his life with a young woman who is a grad student there, not a grad student who is in his influence. But it's sort of that kind of connection that allows him to make a connection with her. And he does actually make a connection with students. He's actually able to kind of do that kind of communication that he so desperately wants. This is a novel where, unfortunately, evil is depicted as deformity. As I mentioned, that Holly Lomax is a hunchback. That is, using that kind of a physical deformity to kind of indicate some kind of twisted of psychology is not something that I think is great. He has a terrible relationship with his wife, which is sort of another thing of grotesquerie, where this is another point in his life where she basically takes away his child Grace from him, denies him that kind of joy in his life, and indeed twists Grace and thwarts her happiness, all in an effort to basically get back at her husband. And it's a really bitter portrayal. Now the thing that maybe counterbalances that is that Stoner never really goes after, he's never bitter and angry to his wife. He does, maybe he has interaction with Hollis Lomax and there's a certain satisfaction there, but by that point it's a detached satisfaction. So, I can still sympathize with Stoner. Stoner is a guy who he has difficult relationships with everyone in a way. And he's an inward guy and bridging that gap. And unfortunately then you get figures like this that have played an outsized influence on his life. But it's interesting how much he kind of takes that and just says, no, I'm going to be me. I'm going to continue on. I'm going to indulge myself in just reading one little section here, sort of a little bit past halfway in the novel. It's and it's into that point in his life where, you do start thinking about meanings and stuff like that. He had come to that moment in his age when there occurred to him, with increasing intensity, a question of such overwhelming simplicity that he had no means to face it. He found himself wondering if his life were worth living, if it had ever been. It was a question, he suspected, that came to all men at one time or another. He wondered if it came to them with such impersonal force as it had come to him. The question brought with it a sadness, but it was a general sadness which, he thought, had little to do with himself or with his particular fate. He was not even sure that the question sprang from the most immediate and obvious causes, from what his own life had become. It came, he believed, from the accretion of his years, from the density of accident and circumstance, and from what he had come to understand of them. He took a grim and ironic pleasure from the possibility that what little learning he had managed to acquire had led him to this knowledge, that in the long run of all things, even the learning that let him know this were futile and empty, and at last diminished into a nothingness they did not alter. Which is somewhat of a, there's a thing of he could really feel sad. This could be a wine fest. This could be, William Stoner bewailing his lot in life, the hard knocks that he got, the bad rolls of the dice that he got. But there's a sense of Stoner is, like a great reader, able to take a step back and look at the super wide picture of all this. And even though that maybe doesn't give that much in the way of a comfort, it also gives it a strange sort of serenity, which Stoner finds by the end of this novel. And, there's the few things I've heard about this novel. It's it's a tragic story of a campus, this academic's life. It's no, this is the triumph of this man's life, of all the terrible things that happened that obviously Williams can conjure up, and Stoner kind of going through it all in this very kind of serene, but also passionate, full of passion, passionate way. And that, you know, finding literature, finding, these comforts in life, finding these toeholds, to be in this life. I came to this novel through Rick McDonald. He did a review called 13 Thoughts About Stoner by John Williams. And I have not watched that for about a year since he published it. And I'm probably going to go back to and watch that right now. But yeah, thank you, Rick, because that's where I came to Stoner. And while there's still things I kind of struggle with, I think about these things of like, I really do not like how disability gets used in here as a moral indicator. But it's also just a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book about a reader, and a quiet life that this is the kind of life that you want captured in a novel, because yeah, from the outside world, it's like, it was nothing. The guy was a failure. Goodbye. It's like, no, this captures this captures that life. And that is a triumph too. All right. I will leave it there. More videos later.